Welcome to Missing in Ohio, a podcast devoted to telling the stories of Ohio's missing loved ones. I am your host, Kelly Bruce, and this is Chapter 16, The Disappearance of Mary Jane Vangilder. Mary Jane Vangilder is a missing adult from Willard, Ohio. She was last seen on February 14, 1945. Mary Jane was 34 years old at the time of her disappearance and would be 108 years old today. Mary Jane is a white female with brown hair and brown eyes. She is 5 foot 5 inches tall and 165 pounds. Mary Jane has freckles on the bridge of her nose and possible scars on her shoulder from being struck by an airplane propeller. If you have any information on the disappearance of Mary Jane Vangilder, please contact Officer Adam Turner and the Shelby Police Department at 419-347-2242. Often when we discuss missing persons cases, we speak of the most recent cases that fill our social media timelines. Today we are going to take a walk into the past to World War II, a time when men were sent to fight for our country and women were sent into the workforce to financially help the family and to keep up on the manufacturing of wartime supplies. Iconic symbols such as Rosie the Riveter were created to recruit women into the defense industry, since it was almost unheard of for women to work outside of the home. Many women stepped up to do their part, including Mary Jane. When Mary Jane's granddaughter, Mindy, reached out to me about her grandmother's disappearance, I began researching her case. It is the oldest missing persons case listed on the Ohio Attorney General's Missing Persons site, and the second oldest case listed for Ohio in the NamUs database. The age of the case initially scared me. I was not sure if there would be enough information to do a whole episode of Missing in Ohio, but I knew I really wanted to help Mindy and her family. The amount of information I found about Mary Jane's disappearance with a simple Google search was surprising. There was more information about this 1945 disappearance online than some newer cases I have worked on, such as Sean Antill from 2017 or Rosemary Rapp from 2016. On top of the information I found online, Mindy put me in contact with Officer Adam Turner, who is leading the investigation on Mary Jane's disappearance. Officer Turner is going to be joining us today, but first I would like to tell you a little bit more about Mary Jane. Mary Jane Croft was born November 19, 1911 in Montana, West Virginia to John and Anna Croft. Mary Jane grew up 10 miles outside of Fairmont, West Virginia with her parents and 7 siblings. At 18 years of age, Mary Jane Croft married James Wesley Vangilder on January 26, 1929. The couple was married for 2 years when they welcomed their first daughter, Anna, in 1931. Mary Jane and James would go on to have 6 more children, 2 of which were stillborn twins. By 1943, Mary Jane and James were in a failing marriage. Instead of divorcing, Mary Jane chose to leave the family farm and move to Fairmont, West Virginia. There are several family stories as to why Mary Jane left the farm, such as James being an alcoholic, Mary Jane's dislike of a relative living on the farm, an extramarital affair, and even claims of alleged abuse in the household by Mary Jane herself. In 1944, without telling her family, Mary Jane packed up and moved to Ohio for work at a new manufacturing factory opening in Shelby, Ohio. The factory was Wilkins Air Force Depot, and they were recruiting women to join the workforce. With most of the men fighting during World War II, women were asked to do their civic duties and replace men in their daily roles. Movies such as A League of Their Own portrays these events with the creation of the Women's Baseball League. Mary Jane began working at the depot in March of 1944 and remained employed until March 1945. During that time, Mary Jane first lived in Plymouth, Ohio at a rooming house on Sandusky Street, then a short time later moved the short distance to Truex Street. Mary Jane made one final move that is known of, and that was to Woodland Avenue in Willard, Ohio. On February 14, 1945, Mary Jane filed for divorce from James in Ohio. This is also the day listed as the day Mary Jane went missing. To find out more about Mary Jane's disappearance, I asked Officer Adam Turner to allow me to interview him for Missing in Ohio. He agreed, and I am now going to take you to that previously recorded interview.
Hi, Officer Turner, and welcome to Missing in Ohio.
Hey, thank you for having me on your program. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate your willingness to cover this case. I think it's very important to get as much media coverage as possible in missing persons investigations, as media coverage and public interest help keep the victim's face out there, and that increases the odds that someone, and all it takes is one, will come forward with needed information. And it helps dial up the pressure on law enforcement to spend time and resources on the case. You know, unfortunately, the bottom line is that not all missing person cases are treated the same. Sometimes, not certainly all the time, but missing persons from a lower socioeconomic status aren't given the kind of public attention that those from middle class or higher backgrounds receive. I disagree with this notion, and I believe that all missing persons investigations should receive media attention. The same can be said for the age of the case. Regardless of age, the case should be worked diligently. But again, thank you for doing this.
No problem at all, and I absolutely agree with you, and actually that is the reason Missing in Ohio was created, because I realized how many cases out there did not get any media attention because of the lifestyle of the missing person. So
right.
I wanted to give the families a platform, regardless of the lifestyle, to still tell the story of their missing person.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we get into Mary Jane's disappearance, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I've been a police officer since 2007. I worked on the Shelby Police Department auxiliary for 1 year, from 2007 to 2008. I then graduated the police academy and worked full-time for the Shelby Police Department until 2012. I then took a job with the Springfield Police Department, where I worked for 4 years. And then I did 2 years as an enforcement investigator with the State Medical Board. In September of 2018, I returned back to Shelby, towards the Shelby Police Department. I have my bachelor's in criminal justice from the University of Toledo and my master's degree in forensic science from St. Leo University.
Wow, that's impressive. So how did you get assigned to Mary Jane's case?
Well, basically, I volunteered for it, and I really knew nothing about it until October of 2018, when my police chief, Lance Combs, he put a post on our Facebook page that he had received an email from a female who identified herself as Mindy Wilson, which is Mary Jane's granddaughter. She said that her grandmother had worked in Shelby in 1944 and 1945, and she was missing from the area. He stated that the family had done kind of a basic investigation, and they had been searching for Mary Jane since the late 1940s, but that their investigation has kind of reached a standstill. So I walked in his office the next day, and I told him that I wanted to take on the case. And the reason I did that is because, I've always had an interest and a passion for the missing and the disappeared. That kind of started at a young age by reading like high-profile cases like Amelia Earhart, D.B. Cooper, Judge Crater, Michael Rockefeller. And then as I aged and I entered into my undergraduate program and later into my master's degree, I was able to focus my research on the missing and unidentified, and that's really where my passion took off.
So tell me, when you took over the case, like Mary Jane's case file, how much information was available to you?
Well, there really was never an official police report made in Ohio in the 40s. After Mindy had reached out to Chief Combs in April of 2018, Chief Combs had called the Plymouth police chief, Tom Heinz, because Mary Jane had lived here in Plymouth during the time in Ohio. Chief Heinz advised that he had looked into the case in 2004 after he received a letter from Mindy's sister, Misty Griner, informing him of her grandmother's disappearance. Prior to that, and we're talking the late 1940s and early 1950s, Mary Jane's eldest daughter, Anna Mae Vangilder Rager, had written letters to the Marion County, West Virginia Sheriff's Department. That's where Mary Jane was originally from, in the city of Fairmont, who in turn wrote letters to the Plymouth Police Department asking for assistance. Anna Mae had also wrote letters to the Ohio State Highway Patrol, the Treasury Department, and the FBI. Now, she would always receive generally the same response, that no trace of your mother could be located and that the federal government would not assist in local law enforcement matters. Beyond that, I don't think anyone in a governmental capacity did much of anything. Now, Anna Mae did have a copy of some of these letters, but she did not have copies of any return from the Plymouth Police Department, and I haven't been able to find any. She did have correspondence between her and the FBI. She did not have correspondences between her and the FBI, but she did remember writing them. I would later receive these correspondences through a Freedom of Information request from the FBI. But the documents that I had when I started the case were few and far between. But they were, one was a picture of Mary Jane at about age 29. Another one was a picture of Mary Jane at age 18, which was taken on her wedding day to her husband, James Wesley Vangilder. I had a copy of their marriage license showing that they married on January 26, 1929. I had a copy of her birth certificate out of Marion County, West Virginia, showing that she was born to parents John William Croft and Anna Wilson. I had a copy of the Plymouth Journal dated December 7, 2004, and that article aired after Misty had wrote to the paper informing them of her grandmother's disappearance. There was a letter to the Treasury Department from Anna Mae, and that was circa 1945. There was a copy of Mary Jane's petition for divorce from James in Huron County, Ohio, in 1945. Chief Heinz of the Plymouth Police Department had written a letter to Misty in 2004 saying that he would try to look into it. There was a letter from the State Highway Patrol to Anna Mae circa about 1950. There was a letter from the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to Anna Mae around 1966. And there was a photocopy of Anna Croft, which was Mary Jane's mother's death certificate. And Chief Heinz had compiled some ancestry records and some newspaper articles, so there were some copies of that. There were some notes he had left, and there was a partial family tree. So there really wasn't a lot. But now when I try to load the file, I mean, it seriously almost crashes our computers at work because it is so large. And I have 3 binders of information just basically overflowing, and they seem to keep growing by the day.
That is really impressive for a case from 1945, and I know we've spoke about that a little bit, how there's more information on Mary Jane's case available now, thanks to your work, than cases I have from 2017. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your investigation and how you began?
Well, I mean, the first thing I did is I looked at, this sparse information that was handed to me, and there really wasn't a lot there. I reached out to Anna Mae, I reached out to Mindy, and I reached out to Misty, and I got kind of a backstory of what transpired. Mindy had said that she had contacted the Mansfield News Journal and that they were going to run a story on her grandmother's disappearance. She told me that an unidentified body was discovered in West Virginia in the 1950s, and it was exhumed in 2004. DNA typing was performed, but it excluded Mary Jane as the victim. It was not her. She said that after her sister had written to the Plymouth paper and they had published the article, Misty had received a letter from a gentleman named William King. And Mr. King said that when he was a child, he remembered her. He stated that his parents would give Mary Jane a ride to work at the Shelby Air Force Depot because she couldn't drive. Then what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure Mary Jane was listed across the internet, so I got her listed on the Charlie Project and the Doe Network, and I updated her information into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Mindy had already created her grandmother's case in NamUs, but it wasn't complete, so I made sure that I entered as much information as I could. I emailed the Marion County, West Virginia Historical Society to see if they could find any information on Mary Jane, and they would later provide me a very detailed document which showed basically Mary Jane's family tree, obits of all the people that had died, any references to her family tree, and that has been invaluable. And then I started searching NamUs for, Jane Does, found throughout the country to see if any matched Mary Jane's physical characteristics.
I know we're going to get into that a little bit more later, but I want to discuss her marriage with James Vangilder a little bit. What have you learned about their marriage?
Well, they were married on January 26th, 1929 in Fairmont, West Virginia, and their marriage produced 6 children. Anna Mae, who I have a close relationship with, the oldest, she was born March 9th of 1931, and she is living. They had a son, James Ray Vangilder, born May 3rd of 1933, and he's also living. They had 2 twins, Alice and Alan Vangilder. They were born May 25th of 1935, but unfortunately, both were stillborn. They had a daughter, Martha Louise Vangilder, born April 28th of 1936, and Barbara Vangilder, born December 7th of 1939. And that is Misty and Mindy's mother, and she unfortunately died June 6th of 2015. There was strife in that marriage. Burying a child is something that no parent should have to go through, and I'm sure this was difficult for Mary Jane and James. When Mary Jane would file for divorce on February 12th of 1945, she would cite extreme cruelty and gross neglect. Now, we don't really know specifics about that, but I do, there have been talks that James might have had some struggles with alcoholism, and from Anna Mae's statements about her mother was very strong-willed and she was very independent, and she would stand up for herself. And, so all of the above factors created possibly a rocky marriage.
And Mary Jane left the family farm in 1943 and moved to Fairmont, West Virginia. Do you know anything about her time while she was there?
So after Mary Jane left the Vangilder residence, which was in the Prickett's Creek area of Fairmont, she did move into the city, and the Vangilder residence was about 15 miles outside of the city limits. According to Anna Mae, her mother worked at a bar and restaurant owned by a man by the name of James Betts, and that was at 401 Adams Street, and that building has since been demolished. Mr. Betts died of Hodgkin's disease in 1946. She lived above the Fairmont Theater, which was unfortunately destroyed by fire in 1945. It was rebuilt in 1946, closed in 2007, and then again demolished in 2012. Anna Mae stated that she remembered visiting her mother above the theater once or twice, but she couldn't exactly remember when her mother left the family house or how long she'd stayed in the apartment. She also really couldn't tell me why her mother left the apartment above the theater and later moved to the Plymouth, Shelby area.
During World War II, the United States government had advertisement campaigns directed to get women into the workforce. And in 1944, Mary Jane decided to go into the workforce and didn't tell her family about it. And she just up and moved to Ohio. Can you tell me a little bit about her employer and the job that Mary Jane was doing?
Sure. So when this all started, we had very limited information about exactly what she was doing. We had a copy of a letter from the military that stated that she worked as a forklift operator for the 831st Army Air Force Specialized Depot in Shelby, Ohio. Recently, within the past several weeks, I was able to get her entire military file, which I originally thought was lost to a fire at the National Archives in the 70s. So that gave me a lot more detailed information on exactly what she was doing. So she was hired as a storekeeper, earning $1,260 a year on March 7th of 1944. On December 21st of 1944, Mary Jane was awarded an emblem for civilian services because she had worked 6 or more consecutive months for the government. And later that year, Mary Jane would request a transfer to the labor and equipment pool. So her classification as a storekeeper went to the classification as a junior warehouseman, and her title was a high lift and fork operator, and she made $1,590 per year. And she worked a day shift from 8 to 4:30, and she retained this position until her resignation from the Army Air Force Depot, which was effective 1 year later on March 7th of 1945. According to her file, Mary Jane did give a 15-day notice, but listed her resignation reason as added household duties.
So then since Mary Jane gave her resignation a year later, that would be March 1945, and that would be after the missing person date that's listed right now as February 14th, 1945, correct?
Yeah, that's true. And the reason that is because before I had this large military file, the only thing that we had that proved that she actually was alive was her divorce decree from James, because she had signed her signature in February of 1945. So we know she appeared before a lawyer or appeared before a judge to sign that divorce petition. Now, we did know that she resigned in March, but I didn't know if that was done over the phone, if it was done through mail, or if it was done by Mary Jane at all. So although we knew that she had resigned in March, there was absolutely nothing physical, tangible that I could say, okay, she did that. She resigned in person. We know she was alive then. Now, because we have this file, I know that the last day that she was alive was March 8th of 1945 because she signed her signature on her resignation papers.
Initially, Mary Jane lived in Plymouth, Ohio, at a rooming house on Sandusky Street, according to the research I've done. What do you know about her time in Plymouth?
So we initially thought that when Mary Jane moved to Ohio, she moved into like this former hotel at 19 Sandusky Street. We then thought that she moved to 2 Truck Street, which is literally across the street, but in a different county. 19 Sandusky Street is in Huron County, while 2 Truck Street is in Richland County. We then thought that she moved to 311 Woodland Avenue in Willard, which is north of Plymouth, also in Huron County. But this was based on documents that we have at the time. Now that we have her military file, we know that her movement was different. We know that we had it backwards. When she first arrived in Ohio, she moved into the 311 Woodland Avenue in Willard. And Willard was a large railroad hub at the time. So my thoughts are that she probably took the train and she got off the train and found the first house that she could. Anna Mae had told me originally that she thought her mother took a plane to get to Ohio, but it's more likely a train, and that the train would have stopped in Willard. You know, at the time, people were renting out rooms to people that were working in the service. So, I mean, the 311 Woodland was a house, but she might not have had the whole house to herself. It might have just been a room. There is a house that stands at 311 Woodland Avenue, but it was built in 1965. So the original structure that Mary Jane lived in was demolished at some point after 1945, and then the structure was built in 1965. So on her initial application for military service, she listed the 311 Woodland Avenue as her address. The final address that we have for her, the very last one, is a P.O. box, and it was box 154 in Willard. So after her departure from the depot, she either moved back to the Willard area, or she might have just established a P.O. box there. But, you know, unfortunately, the bank does not have records. The bank and the post office have no records going back that far that would provide like a forwarding address.
Even though Mary Jane was separated from her husband and children, she remained in communication with her oldest daughter, Anna Mae. What has Anna Mae told you about her communication with her mom during her time in Ohio?
So after Mary Jane left West Virginia, her husband, James, would subsequently remarry. And Anna Mae said that, you know, if any artifacts, clothes, evidence, anything of Mary Jane's that she had left behind at the Vangilder residence was probably thrown out pretty quickly after she left, because James had remarried. And, you know, there's not too many spouses that would want, you know, their significant other keeping things related to their ex around. But even if he did, and the items were in a basement somewhere, tucked away, the Vangilder home burned to the ground in the 1980s. So any trace of Mary Jane, any items or artifacts of hers, letters, are long gone. Now, I originally thought that Anna Mae and Mary Jane had wrote letters back and forth to each other. But recently, Anna Mae told me that a family friend had told her, Anna Mae, to write letters to her mother. So she did. And Anna Mae stated that she couldn't really remember the contents of these letters, but they were just, you know, that she talked about ordinary life events that occurred at the time. Anna Mae stated that she wrote her mother several letters, but that she only ever received one in return. And that letter, Mary Jane asked that Anna Mae send her back the war bonds that Mary Jane had deducted from her payroll and sent to Anna Mae.
So Mary Jane didn't actually purchase the war bonds to send to her family. They were purchased through her employer?
That's correct. On her military paperwork, she listed her beneficiary as Anna Mae. And the war bonds were not sent directly from Mary Jane. They were deducted from Mary Jane's payroll and then sent to her eldest daughter.
Do we know why she asked for them back, or anything else about Mary Jane's request?
We really don't. She had just asked for that one back, and Anna Mae sent it back. and she said she didn't receive any. She received one more war bond, and that was in December of 45. But other than that, that was the last correspondence, and we have no idea why she wanted them back. I mean, we can theorize that, you know, maybe she needed the money to move somewhere else or start a new life. I mean, the reasons, you know, could be, there's a lot of reasons, but we just don't know.
Have you had any luck tracking down the war bonds?
No, that's been difficult. You know, that's part of the mystery. We really don't know why she wanted them back. The records show that Mary Jane had cashed the bonds in the Willard, Plymouth area, and we know that she used at least one bank, and that was cashed at the People's National Bank in Plymouth. It's no longer there. The building's still there, but the bank is out of business. So on May 12th of 1950, the sheriff of Marion County, West Virginia, wrote to the U.S. Treasury Department, and he asked them if they knew the whereabouts of Mary Jane. And he asked for a check on, and I will quote exactly what he said here. He said, "Please check that this $25 bond with an issue date of December 1st, 1944, number 4-2380, January 12th, 1945, U.S. Savings Bond, issue agent, bond number in red, Q542014474E, issued to Mrs. Mary Jane Vangilder, 2 Truck Street, Plymouth, Ohio. Pre-authorized debt, Miss Anna May Vangilder." On August 14th, August 14th of 1951, Anna May received a letter from the Treasury Department stating, basically this refers to your letter of July 24th of 1951 concerning the savings bonds registered in the name of your mother, Mrs. Mary Jane Vangilder, on which your name appears as a beneficiary. Our records show that certain savings bonds registered in the form given above were paid by the People's National Bank, Plymouth, Ohio, on various dates in 1945. That's all we have.
I know you and I know what they are, but can you describe to the listeners what war bonds are?
Sure. A war bond is a debt instrument issued by the government as a means of borrowing money to finance the defense initiatives and military efforts during times of war. A war bond is essentially a loan to the government. In the U.S., the sale of war bonds was overseen by the War Finance Committee. They were initially known as defense bonds and were first issued as Liberty bonds in 1917 to finance the United States government in World War I. Through the sale of these bonds, the government raised $21.5 billion for its war efforts. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941, the U.S. entered the Second World War, and defense bonds were renamed war bonds. More than 80 million Americans purchased war bonds and brought in over $180 billion in revenue. So a war bond is a government-issued debt instrument used for borrowing money to finance defense and military initiatives. War bonds didn't really pay interest payments, and they sold about 50 to 75% of their face value, and it initially had a maturity of about 10 years. So in this case, Mary Jane purchased these war bonds through her employer, and it was automatically deducted from her payroll. So she purchased $25 through the payroll deduction system, and the bonds were mailed to her daughter, Anna May. And in January 1945, she wrote to her daughter and had her send all of the war bonds back, and that was the last letter of contact anyone has had with her. However, after her war bonds were mailed to her, her daughter received another bond in December of that year for $25.
I know we touched base a little bit on Mary Jane filing for divorce on February 14, 1945, but in the records I found that James also filed for divorce in West Virginia on November 23, 1945. Why the need for the double filing?
Well, like I mentioned above, there was turmoil in a relationship. She was 18, he was 21 when they got married, and like I said, Mary Jane alleged in the divorce filing that James was cruel to her. There's talk of alcoholism, infidelity, arguing, maybe a potential lack of equality with Mary Jane wanting to work, and James wanted her to kind of stay home and raise the children. I'm sure all of this kind of created a habitat right for divorce. Mary Jane did file February 12th of 1945 in Huron County, Ohio, for her divorce, and James filed for his divorce in Marion County on November 23rd of 1945. It was granted 3 days later on November 26th of 1945. So the reason of these filings is probably because Mary Jane's divorce proceedings in Ohio were not moving forward. Likely because at that point she was already missing. The case in Ohio couldn't go forward, basically because she wasn't around. If her lawyer couldn't get a hold of her, the case was dropped. It was subsequently dropped. So James had to file for divorce in Marion County because the divorce here was basically done because they couldn't find Mary Jane.
So that's since she didn't show up, that's probably why his divorce was also granted in 3 days, and he received custody of the children as well, right?
Yes. They likely, and this is all theorizing, but they likely, she didn't respond to paperwork to show up at court. We know she didn't show up to court, so the issue here was dropped. The 23rd, which is when James requested a divorce, was on a Friday. His divorce was granted the following Monday, the 26th. So, yeah, it's likely that the judge probably couldn't hear the case because it was the weekend, and when he returned the following week, it was granted.
So you mentioned alleged abuse, and you also mentioned an extramarital affair. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, we know that, Mary Jane did have a child with a man named Delbert Calger. And Delbert was in the service, and Delbert was stationed in Baltimore, Maryland. And in one of the documents that I got back from the FBI through the Freedom of Information request, is there was a letter from the Marion County Sheriff to the chief of the Baltimore Police Department asking if he knew the whereabouts of Mary Jane, because the theory was that maybe Mary Jane went to find Delbert. Things happen. It's not to slander anybody or put out a false narrative or to disparage someone's name, but the facts are facts. And that daughter, Judy, was raised by James, and James raised her as his own daughter. So that says a lot for James, that James was willing to raise her as his own.
Are there any reported sightings of Mary Jane since the day she disappeared?
When Anna Mae started the search for her mother, she had requested writings. She started writing letters to various law enforcement entities. And one of the letters she had written was to the Ohio State Highway Patrol in July of 1950. And their response, this is exactly what they said. They said, "The last trace of Mrs. Vangilder we were able to find was that a former associate thought she saw her on the streets of Willard, Ohio, a few weeks later. No forwarding address was found." We have no idea who that associate was. We don't know if it was a credible sighting at all. I have made a public records request to the State Highway Patrol to see if maybe they did have some investigative documents that we did not have that maybe would have identified that associate, but they had absolutely no records at all concerning this event, even though that we know that they were involved somehow.
So Mary Jane goes missing and is not contacting her family. Were there any conversations between James to the children about their mother and what was going on?
No. I've asked that several times to Anna Mae, and, you know, she just basically said her mother was not mentioned. It was never brought up. It was a topic that was not spoken of. And there was absolutely no theorizing on where she was. I mean, it was like literally she did not exist. And James remarried his second wife, and her name was Virginia Cowger, on November 6th of 1945. But no, there was no talk of their mother.
Was there ever any history of Mary Jane running off of her own accord?
I mean, no. I mean, to this date, there's been no evidence found at all past the March 8th of 1945 date. You know, we know that Mary Jane did leave the family home in 1944 to work in downtown Fairmont, but other than that, there were no other instances where she ran off. But, you know, let me mention something else here. Mary Jane's sister, her name was Rose Croft, is also missing, and we have no idea of her whereabouts. She has never been reported officially as missing, but again, the family just doesn't know where she ended up. According to Anna Mae, one of Rose's children received a letter in the 60s stating that his mother was either in a hospital or an institution in the New York or surrounding states. Other than that, the son did not reply to that letter because Rose had run off, and the son thought that they were asking or looking for money. So the letter that he received is gone. We don't know where that is. And efforts to locate Rose have been very difficult. We know that Rose had married a man by the name of George Leeson on July 7th of 1934, and they were listed as still married in the 1940 census. Now, we always, you know, before this, I had been searching for Rose Croft, Rose Leeson, and I've never been able to find anything. But in the military record that we just received, in 1944, Mary Jane listed her sister's name as Rose Ashcraft. And Ashcraft is a name that we have never heard before. So, you know, Mary Jane must have known in 1944 that her sister had married somebody else by the name of Ashcraft. And I am currently attempting to try to locate a Rose Ashcraft.
So you're not only looking for Mary Jane, you're looking for information about Rose as well.
Right. And the two might be, completely unrelated, but it's very odd, and I don't believe in coincidences, that two sisters, go missing. It's possible that Rose knew where Mary Jane was. It's possible that if we could find out where Rose ended up, maybe somewhere Rose has letters that she wrote to her sister. And there might be an address on those letters saying where Mary Jane was staying at the time. It's a stretch. It's a big stretch. But if I could at least find out what happened to Rose, what state she died in, and where she died, that might give me a point to at least start researching from that city, from that state. So yeah, I'm looking for both of them, but the information on both of them is very difficult to uncover after their disappearance.
While researching, I also found several articles about exhumations you have requested. Tell me what you have done and the results of your work.
Okay. The first thing that happened was I was searching the internet, and I found an article on findagrave.com, and it said "Lady in the Box, unknown, buried in Fowler Cemetery in Benton County, Indiana," and that was in 1966. And this body was found buried in a cardboard box on a farm 6 miles north of Otterbein, Indiana. This female was shot to the back of the head at a close range, and the time of death was set at 7 to 10 days before she was found. The description of this female was a heavy-set aging woman, about 5 feet 2 inches tall, with faded reddish-brown hair. So through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, I was able to contact coroner investigator Matt Rosenbarger, and this is exactly what he said. He said, "Adam, I'm familiar enough with the incident to be dangerous. Unfortunately, my coroner's office records do not go back that far. I do recall reading some of the case information from the sheriff's department when I worked there. However, I know they let a former sheriff check out the case in the early 90s, and it never got returned. I've always had an interest in an attempt to identify this victim, but without the main case, it makes it difficult to do much of anything." So in July of 2019, I was on Facebook, and I was going through my feed, and I saw a headline that said "Body Exhumed, Reopening 1976 Cold Case of Woman Found in a Box in Benton County Cornfield." And I read the article, and I said, "Well, that's the case that I inquired on." And the article said, in January, Rosenbarger said Namus checked in with a request from a police department in Ohio, and I later contacted Mr. Rosenbarger, and I said, "Hey, am I the Ohio investigator that spurred you to kind of do this?" And he said, "Yeah, you were. Once you called, it kind of got the ball rolling, and he was able to do an exhumation." So the DNA test results on that Jane Doe have not come back yet, but they are right now being tested. Another Jane Doe I found in December of 2018. This was also on Find a Grave, and this article said that there were human remains found in Eaton, Ohio. The article reads, the unidentified remains of a human, believed to be Caucasian female, were found in Eaton on May 25th. She would be buried early next week, according to Dr. Richard F. Sile, Preble County coroner. The burial will be in a pauper's grave in Mound Hill Union Cemetery at Eaton. Children found the badly decomposed remains about 100 feet southwest of a new residence on Frederick Drive. Efforts by the coroner to learn the identity of the remains have been unsuccessful. The remains are believed to be a person about 35 years old, 62.5 to 64 inches in height, slender, with an approximate weight of 132 pounds. A partial lower dental plate was found near the remains, which had a split left 7th rib. So I was able to contact Dave Linloff of the Preble County Coroner's Office. And I can't say enough good things about Dave because, he's just a phenomenal person. And I told him that I wanted to exhume this body, and he was fully on board. We exchanged documents. He was able to get me the original case file, and it took several months of planning and a lot of legwork on Dave's part, but, we were able to get the exhumation scheduled. And the reason that that was such an easy process was basically because of Dave, the Preble County Coroner's Office, and the City of Eaton, the cemetery personnel, and the prosecutor's office, and city employees. Because what they did is they donated all of their time to exhume this body and charged us absolutely nothing. The only cost that we incurred as a police department was the cost to purchase this Jane a new casket, which we were happy to do. So in August of last year, Chief Combs and I, we traveled to the Mound Hill Cemetery in Eaton for the exhumation, and Dave Lindloff and Coroner Vossler was there, along with County Commissioner Rodney Creech, Sean McCracken, who runs a YouTube channel called Mysterious West Virginia, was also present, and he had done a video on Mary Jane, and it is currently on YouTube, and that got a lot of publicity. So I invited him to come and be present for the exhumation because he had helped me out so much in getting Mary Jane's case out there. The sexton of the cemetery had located the grave based off of a few original pictures that were taken at the time. When we reached the vault, it was completely intact, and the lid was removed, and the vault was undamaged. The grave was dry, but there was evidence that at some point water was present in the past because there was a water line on the vault. The bottom of the vault had the remains of an old body bag, and the bones of the Jane Doe were underneath a material of the degraded body bag and a layer of silt. So the original casket had completely disintegrated, except for metal handles that would have been used to lower it into the grave. Ohio BCI arrived on scene, and they removed the Jane Doe from the grave, and they took both femurs as well as multiple digits from the feet and hands. They were optimistic about the retrieval of the DNA. Interestingly, there was no skull inside the vault. But when we went back through and reviewed the original coroner's report, there was a small notation that said that the skull was kept in the private collection of the original coroner's investigator, Tim Miller, and that was something we had kind of overlooked. So BCI currently has the bones of this Jane Doe, and as of 2 weeks ago, they were unable to generate a usable profile from the bones. They're going to try to get mitochondrial DNA from the bones, but if that fails, we're going to pursue the angle of forensic genealogy if there's not a hit in the national DNA system. I have been in talks with Anthony Redgrave, and he runs Redgrave Research, and he has agreed to take on the case to perform the forensic genealogy. Another kind of a success based on this case, my kid, at the time, that exhumation got a lot of publicity. And so earlier this year, I got a call from Detective Levi Kabler in Williams County, Wilson, North Dakota, and he said that he had there was a John Doe found in his county in 1982, and he really didn't know what to do. He wanted to exhume the body, but he didn't know where to start, and so he searched the internet, and he came across my case, and so we spoke about it for a while. He called me, we spoke about it, and he said, "What should I do?" And I said, that body needs exhumed. And I didn't hear anything from him for a couple months, and then last week he called me, and he said that they exhumed the body. It was remarkably preserved, and based on a tattoo on the body that was still visible, they circulated a photo of it to the news media, and shortly thereafter they received a call from a woman who said that she thought the John Doe was her uncle, and sure enough it was. I mean, he had never been officially reported, but they were able to identify him based off tattoo and fingerprints. So I'm happy that my case has kind of spurned two other law enforcement investigators to exhume.
Besides the exhumations, is there anything else specific you're working on right now with Mary Jane's disappearance?
I'm always working on something. I mean, now that I have her military file, I'm able to trace her Social Security number, and we never had her Social Security number before. It was never listed on any of the documents that we originally had. So that military file was really a gold mine, because I didn't know originally if she even had a Social Security number, but now we know that she did. I've been in touch with the U.S. Marshal Service and asked for their assistance in contacting the Social Security Administration to see if they can track down that social, to see if it was used after 1945. Because the Social Security Administration, they really will not release anything to any other law enforcement agency besides agencies at the federal level. So I know that Mary Jane's social was issued in West Virginia and not in Ohio. So I'm working on that. You know, I am constantly trying to get her case as much media attention as possible. So again, you know, thank you for doing this. Right now I'm in talks with investigator Anjanette Fisher of the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office, and we're looking to exhume a body found in Lake Erie in 1969. We are still in the early stages of the process. It does take a lot of paperwork to get a body exhumed, but I'm confident that we will be able to get this accomplished. And, you know, even if it's not Mary Jane, I'm hopeful that we can get this Jane Doe identified and potentially, you know, give her name back and give a family some closure. But ultimately, what I need is coroner's offices, you know, to work with me. I need them to contact me. You know, if there's a Jane Doe in their jurisdiction whose physical characteristics and circumstances could be Mary Jane, we need to speak. We need to do exhumations. You know, now more than ever before, science has given us tools to give a name back to those unknowns and potential closure to some families. And if anything good comes from my case, I hope it's this. You know, I grew up living above a funeral home, and my parents were licensed funeral directors, so I've been around death my whole life. And I know the importance of funerals and the burial process. So I think deep down that's where my passion comes from. I'm cognizant that there are religious, social, cultural, and moral issues that someone could raise here. And my intention is not to exhume the entire country for no reason. My intention is to give a name back to someone. We have to remember that, you know, a body represents someone's mother, father, or brother, or sister who had a name and a history. But in more scientific terms, they constitute evidence that requires an investigation and analysis in order to answer specific questions. And a physical body can provide a multitude of clues or avenues to pursue for a criminal investigator. So we need to be doing more exhumations because, like I said, now is the best time to do that because, you know, DNA is giving us that technology to be able to identify people.
What are the theories that you believe are most likely regarding Mary Jane's disappearance?
No, I mean, there's several theories, and none of which we have conclusive evidence, obviously. But, you know, the first theory is that Mary Jane wanted to disappear on her own accord and start a new life elsewhere. Second is that she met with foul play shortly after she resigned. And the third is that she had an accident shortly after she resigned or in the years following. You know, I really don't know what to believe, but my gut is that her body has yet to be officially buried. I don't believe that she lived out her life under another name into adulthood. She's a Jane Doe somewhere, buried under that heading, or her remains have yet to be discovered. Maybe not in my case, but I believe a great deal of missing people are in bodies of water, lakes, ponds, reservoirs, etc., especially if a missing person disappeared with a car. The car is likely with that missing person in a body of water. I don't think that's the case in Mary Jane's case because she didn't drive, but in many other cases, that's what happened.
What is the biggest thing you would like the public to know about Mary Jane's disappearance, or how can the public assist you in your investigation?
I want the public to know that although 75 years have passed, Mary Jane is still loved and missed by her family. Her family is in this perpetual state of limbo. It's this gray purgatory hell that never goes away. There's absolutely no closure here. And, I've heard from numerous people, oh, what a waste of time. This case is so old, you never solve it. And, that philosophy, gets me fired up. I mean, that is a lazy excuse to not do any work. I think that any case can be solved. You just have to be diligent and methodical. There's, like you said earlier, there's absolutely no reason at all why my case, which is 75 years old, has more information out there than missing and unidentified person cases that happened in recent years. I don't have a body in my case, so I've tended to focus my investigation on the often overlooked human element, which makes the investigation and recovery more personalized, emphasizing that they have a name and a grieving family. The last moments of life, interests, and activities become a focus of necessary interest, and my ethical and professional responsibilities are more real and more paramount. I want people to know that I do care a great deal for Mary Jane's family. I have best mom imaginable, and I can't imagine my life without her. So to think that Anna Mae has searched for her mother for 75 years shows the depth of that enduring love. I mean, the same can be said for Mindy and Misty. I've been fortunate to have both of my grandmothers into my adulthood, and again, they have shaped my life. Now, Mindy and Misty never got that chance to know their grandmother, but that doesn't mean they don't love her. That doesn't mean they don't miss her, and that they don't want to know where she is. Our ancestry ties us back through time, ties us here to Earth, and in their case, there's a missing piece for them, and I'm hoping that I can help them solve that. How can the public help me? By sharing Mary Jane's case across social media, by searching unidentified Jane Does throughout the country to see if parameters match up to Mary Jane's, and then contacting me. Every year in the United States, 900,000 people go missing. It is really the nation's silent mass disaster. So the public can become an advocate for the missing and the unidentified. People can do their own research, try to match missing persons with known unidentifieds. Another big help for me and other investigators would be for people to categorize cemeteries. And what they can do is they can walk through their local cemeteries and photograph each grave and then upload them to a site called Find a Grave. And anyone can do that. It just takes time. There are a lot of cemeteries that are categorized, but many are not. So if somebody did that, it's possible that Mary Jane could be buried in a cemetery somewhere. We just don't know about it.
How can we follow Mary Jane's disappearance and any updates you may discover in the future?
I have a Facebook page which is dedicated to her, and it's titled, in all capital letters, Missing Mary Jane Vangilder, and I will post updates to the group as I go along. I also do have a close relationship with Sean McCracken, who runs that YouTube channel, Mysterious WV. So if I get a big update, I will notify him as well. Now, he is doing a anniversary follow-up edition to my case, and I believe he's going to be posting that within the next couple days. Anyone at any time can reach out to me at my phone number, and this is my work phone number. It's area code 419-347-2242, or you can contact me at my email address, and that's my first name, Adam, A-D-A-M, .Turner, T-U-R-N-E-R, at Shelby, S-H-E-L-B-Y, P-D.org.
I work with several missing persons cases, and you have been a breath of fresh air to work with your transparency on Mary Jane's case. Do you have any suggestions for the other families that I work with or anyone else that has a missing loved one that they can do?
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me, and thank you for covering this case. But, you know, two investigators with similar cases or family members are missing. These cases, they require exceptional thoroughness, you know, almost to the point of OCD. I mean, you have to look at every detail. You have to examine every single possible theory, opinion, or lead. You have to develop your own leads. You have to make connections, and you have to document absolutely everything you do. You have to call people. You have to email people. You have to Facebook people. You have to write letters to develop new leads. Do freedom of information checks. Transparency is crucial with the family of loved ones, and to value their input. You know, people need to remember that death is incredibly painful, but burial, cremation, and funerals, memorials, they give those left behind some degree of closure, even though that word is often overused. For families of the missing, not knowing is the hardest part, and that's oftentimes worse than death. It's the unanswered questions, the wondering. It's that open wound. So to investigators that have similar cases, ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. You need to make contacts with everybody. Make contacts in the media with someone you can trust. Get your case exposure. These cases, they require a give and receive relationship. Don't keep everything so close to the chest. Use volunteers as they can provide a different perspective. If a cold missing persons case, take it off the shelf. You know, a fresh set of eyes. You know, it may discover inconsistencies in the investigations or gaps in documentation. You know, additionally, volunteers have time to do busy work. I mean, such as arranging case files or making spreadsheets of family members, which frees up some time for the detective, you know, some busy work. It can free up time while volunteers do that. And, you know, volunteers, they can offer specific skills, you know, such as web design, historical or genealogical research, or software expertise. And most of the time, these volunteers are willing to work for free, and some of them may be working towards a new career, or others are just fulfilling, you know, maybe a specific interest or simply want to contribute back to their community. So transparency is key. Admitting that you don't know everything is key, and admitting that you need help. That is the way to solve it. And get your case out there. If your case is in the media, if your missing person's case is in the media, people remain interested. The minute it falls out of the media spotlight, you know, the chance of your missing person being found decreases substantially.
Thank you for that advice, and thank you for your time today and all of your hard work on Mary Jane's disappearance. I look forward to working with you more in the future on this case.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and I agree.
I would like to take a minute to praise Officer Turner and the family of Mary Jane Vangilder for the work they have done on this 75-year-old case. I cannot even believe the amount of information and number of documents that have been shared with me. It has been like a trip back in time. What I have learned about Mary Jane is that she was a strong and fearless woman, willing to do her part to help her family and a country at war, even if that meant walking away from everyone she loved. Mary Jane had a great employment record with the U.S. government and even received promotions for her hard work. So what made Mary Jane walk away from her job on March 7, 1945, And what additional household duties was she referring to? I know if these answers can be found, Officer Adam Turner will find them. The approach Officer Turner has taken is proving to be effective with the discovery of Mary Jane's military records just this month. I wish more officers investigating missing persons cases would take this same transparent approach. Who knows how many missing loved ones we could bring home. Today in Missing in Ohio News, I want to tell you about 2 new disappearances. The first is the disappearance of Raymont Willis II. Raymont, also known as Frog, is a missing adult from Waverly, Ohio. He was last seen on July 9, 2020. Raymont is a black male and is 42 years old. He is 6 feet tall and 203 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. If you have any information on the disappearance of Raymont Willis II, please contact the Pike County Sheriff's Office at 740-947-2111. The second case I want to tell you about is the disappearance of Kobe Roush. Kobe is a missing adult from Waverly, Ohio. He was last seen on July 5, 2020. Kobe is a white male and is 24 years old. He is 6 foot 2 inches tall and 205 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. Kobe's car was found abandoned in Gallia, Ohio. If you have any information on the disappearance of Kobe Roush, please contact the Perry County Sheriff's Office at 740-342-4123. I would like to add, it is unknown if these cases are connected, even though they both went missing from the same city. If you have a missing loved one and would like for us to help you tell their story, email us at missingpersonsinohio@gmail.com. You can also contact us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find Missing in Ohio on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Join in the discussion on our Facebook group page, Missing in Ohio Case Discussion Page. You can listen to Missing in Ohio on Spotify, Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Stitcher. Missing in Ohio now has a Patreon page. We offer a variety of tier levels which allow you to help support us. Tier levels begin for as little as $2 per month. All money donated will go towards investigation costs, production of weekly episodes, upgrading equipment, and hosting missing person awareness events. We do this all out of pocket, so your donation will be greatly appreciated. You can also make a one-time donation on PayPal by using our email address, missingpersonsinohio@gmail.com. Links to both pages can be found in the show